and then they had to make a catalog. So all of a sudden they got these 4 things to do. And they discovered in an interesting game of playing one supplier in town against the other big supplier in town, one of them said something to him about, did he give you terms like that? And they're like, and they said some coy answer to make him think that they did. And so, well, I'll match whatever he did. And so they end up giving him, because they try to go to a bank for a loan. But did you know banks will only give you money if you don't need it? If you can prove you don't need it, they're happy to collect your interest off the loan. But seriously, banks will loan money for a business enterprise as long as it's not creative. If it's anything kind of new, anything outside of what they know already, they won't loan you the money. That's called a startup. And for that, you need venture capital and angel investing and a rich dad. Wouldn't hurt. But if you want to open a tire store in town, the bank has tables and tables and tables of what to expect when they invest in a tire store. If you want to own some type of service like a dentist office, they have tables and tables and charts of data. They know what to expect from a dentist office, and they can figure out the risk of the loan and give you a loan accordingly. But it takes no real creativity to open something that millions of other people have done and banks will loan you money to. But when you're going to sell jungle clothing, it's out there a little bit. So the banker laughed him out of the chair. Like, you have no money, you have no experience, you don't know anything, the whole don't know anything list that I read you. And he said, why don't you just get your merchandise on terms? Well, having no business experience, they didn't even know what terms were. What that means is you can get the merchandise and sell it and take the money you're making from selling it to pay back the supplier that gave it to you in the first place. And there's 30, 60, 90-day terms, how long the supplier will give it. Most of you guys know that. So they didn't know that. They figured that out from the banker, and then they played one supplier against the other to get terms on this merchandise, and it started working. And they had another insight. The more we thought about it, Mel said, the catalog struck us as the key to the whole endeavor. What we were doing was unlike anything we'd ever seen in retail. And people would need a little help from us for it to catch on. That makes sense. Then they had another insight. As they started having trouble finding enough surplus clothes, they'd find surplus stuff, but it wasn't anything that would be directly usable by some new purchaser. And so they realized that the fabrics, though, were extremely high quality, nothing but the best for the government. And so these fabrics were really high quality and usually kind of rare. They weren't things you found in garments anywhere else. And so Patricia said this arrangement was sweetly familiar to me, having spent many contented hours as a child piecing together doll clothes from scraps of fabric on the floor while my Italian mother and grandmother sewed clothing. And so she realized they could take these materials and modify them into other things, like really cool backpacks and bags and satchels and ponchos, and that's what they started doing. It started working. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, because they used an old journalism phrase, which is go with what you've got. It's time to go to the press. You got a little bit of a story. What should you run? You don't have the whole story? Print it. Go with what you got. And that's what they did. And I think it's important to pause right now in the development of this narrative, because if you've read my Pales book, where I talk about life isn't choosing between different paths. Should you follow your passion and your heart down this one, and supposedly the money will follow? Or should you just surrender all your passions and work some job you hate because at least it'll work and you'll never be broke? Life is not really a choice between those two extremes. It's really layers upon layers of our experiences that build on who we are and make us different today than we were several layers ago. And they prepare us for that next step. And you can see in their story that they had been prepared in many ways for these moments. Her sewing's a great example. In the meantime, they were trying to learn everything they knew that they didn't know. And Mel's reading books on business voraciously. Another key point, you can read to gain ground in areas in which you're ignorant. So they set up their first store. They decorated this whole jungle motif. They painted the outside of it in zebra stripes. The location wasn't very good because they had no money, and so they just kind of worked a deal with somebody they knew, and they got this old dead store. And it had these weird posts, and so they turned them into trees, and they stapled palm fronds to the top of them to make them look like palm trees. And you walk in, it was this really jungly thing. And they didn't have normal store fixtures, so they just used the big wooden crates that most of their surplus stuff came in, and it just kind of happened to match the exploratory motif, the jungle look of the whole place, and it kind of went well. And they nail a bunch of nails into those posts and hang hats on them. And I guess it was quite the appealing little jungle excursion to walk in that store. Only nobody did. The first day, they had several people kind of stop and look in and keep walking, not sure what was going on in there. And finally, toward the end of the day, one person came in and bought something for $19 or something. That was the whole day. And day after day after day after day, it went on like this. And here they were, barely able to pay the rent on their apartment, barely able to pay the rent on this new store, and certainly they didn't have enough money coming in to pay for the merchandise that they'd bought. And so they were really worried. But Mel said, don't worry about it. We just mailed out our catalogs. Now, how many know the mail order business is tough, too? You get a very small return rate on those. But a few orders started trickling in. And then something happened. A local newspaper did an article on them and finally kind of let people know about this creative new store. And they went to the store one morning, and there's like 40 people milling around outside waiting to get in. And so they started making sales, and they realized they'd never even bought a cash register. So they're making change out of their purse and wallet and calling their friends. You got any ones? You know. And then a radio station called one morning right in the middle of her serving some customers and featured her live on the air. And the radio station was from New York. She's in San Francisco. But that kicked their mail order business, and all of a sudden people started mailing checks for different things in the little catalog, and it started taking off. Mel said media became the petroleum that powered our growth. And, you know, one of the things to get from that is you got to get the word out on what you're doing. They happen to have media that kind of worked for them because they were unique enough it was a good story. But you got to get the word out about what you're doing. You have to tell a story. There has to be something unique. There has to be a good hook. There has to be a good lead, something that captures the imagination and gets people's attention. And that's what happened here. Because of the story and Mel's clever catalog writing, their mail order business was way ahead of what the odds say you should receive in mail order. Now, the catalog wasn't just lists of items and photos of them. Instead, it was Patricia's sketches of the items, which somehow made it a little bit more enchanting. And it wasn't just to write up, British Burma jacket. They'd make up some story. Mel would write some fantastic story about how they'd gotten this jacket out of the clutches of the hands of a lion, and, well, lions don't have hands, but whatever they have. You can tell I'm a real animal enthusiast. But their creativity was starting to gain traction, and people were starting to send in orders, and it was beginning to work. And here's the point there, that you don't really want to believe the odds if you're doing something unique. There are really no odds. How would anybody know? You're carving new territory. You're plowing new ground. Mel said, if I had read and followed all the how-to books beforehand, I might still be collecting a paycheck at the Chronicle. See, they just kind of let themselves go a little bit and unleash their creativity, and it was a bit of a labor of love, and customers started resonating with that. They started identifying with that, and the brand started to take root. They called themselves accidental professional amateurs. I really like that phrase. And they worked super hard, pretty much around the clock, doing every kind of job you can imagine, from operations to banking to inventory to ordering to fabricating to shipping to artist work to draw up the things and catalogs and flyers and manning the store. And just every job that there was to do, they split it among their entire workforce, 2 of them. And they tried to hire some employees, and that went well at first, and then it went bad, and someone stole from them, then they stole inventory, and then they had a delivery guy, and he was delivering stuff to his friends for free, and all the type of stuff that happens that you hear about in lots of conventional businesses. And a couple of times their creativity went too far. Like when Mel wrote in one of the catalogs about an Italian army jacket that they had for sale. And he said something derogatory about the Italian army. They might not be very good at fighting, but boy, they sure do know how to design a nice jacket, something to that effect. We could have never planned it like this, but the Italian consul in Los Angeles got offended and went on the air on the radio to berate this upstart company named Banana Republic and take them to task. And he said, I was listening to the radio, and at first I was cringing like, yeah, I guess he's right. What do I know about Italian military? I probably offended a couple million people. Who am I to cut them down? I didn't know it. I just thought it was funny. I didn't mean to hurt his feelings. And then the guy kept going on the radio and kept going and talking about what a terrible group this Banana Republic must be and and he started realizing I stopped feeling bad pretty quickly and started grinning because we're getting all this free publicity. So all these people started showing up to find out who these bad people were that would dare insult the Italian military and what those Italian jackets look like anyway. They sounded pretty cool, And Mel said, I believed the best way to ensure our long-term survival was to over-deliver, go above and beyond, and most importantly, make a human connection with customers. Now you think about it. Anything you do, whether you're in business for yourself or not, whatever type of job or career you have, think about it. If you did those two things, how much better would your influence and your success be? If you over-delivered and you sought to make a real human contact with the people you serve and work with. Can you imagine if really that was your overriding value system in what you do professionally? Would that have an effect? Absolutely it would, for sure. One of the funny things that happened is their main warehouse where they were assembling these clothes and modifying these clothes, it was down by the docks, and it flooded. And it flooded so often that everybody just got issued work boots or rain boots when they got there. And so you just work there in rain boots and stand in 1.5 feet of water, and no big deal. Can you imagine that today? I don't think OSHA would approve. Mel said, we unwittingly plunged into 3 businesses at once: a store business, a catalog business, and a remanufacturing business. They had nonstop need for money to restock, expand, open a second store, and find more surplus. And every time they'd make a little bit, they'd have to turn around and invest it all back in. And remember, they're working every day, dawn till dusk, 7 days a week, nonstop. And every little bit of advancement they make, it's got to go right back in to expand and get new inventory and do it all over again. At the same time, they got people stealing from them, people stealing merchandise, stealing money out of the cash register, the places flooding, all these different things. So they decided to take a break. They got a good operations manager finally. Said, we need a rest. And they flew down to Rio, and their very first 10 minutes on the beach in Rio de Janeiro, they got robbed of everything they had. Passports, money, absolutely everything. And the police are trying to help them find it and everything. And somebody actually sent everything back minus the money, gave them their passports back and everything so they could get out of there at least. And the police chief said, you're beginning to learn about Jeito. Jeito, Jeito. And that's the Brazilian saying for there is always a way.